Cool. Hello, everyone. My name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. Today we're doing a Thai noodle dish called pad see ew. If you're not familiar, pad see ew is a Thai dish that's done with a very thin noodle referred to as chow fun, most commonly in Chinese food. That's what you would call it. Regardless, it's a wide, thin rice noodle you probably see it in Chinatown referred to as chow fun, at least. Today we're going to be doing that with some fresh chow fun, which is hard to find and hard to keep stable. So we're going to talk about that later. There are also many variations on the same dish, all of which you will see come up in much of the Thai cuisine that you'll find in the States here, because they're all basically variations on the same concept. So we'll talk about all of that today too. As always, what we're cooking today, it has a recipe video that goes along with it. That recipe, it always lives over on my YouTube channel, which came back out, I think sometime in 2020. I forget when in 2020, but time last year. So if you're looking for that stuff, that's over on the YouTube channel. That's always useful to bookmark if you're trying to cook what we're cooking today, because those recipes, they tend to move a little bit slower. So if you haven't checked out the YouTube channel yet, definitely hop over there and check out what's going on if you're interested. Lots of fun stuff coming out. We have new recipes. Those are out every Friday. So last Friday we came out with a recipe for a Chinese xianbing, which is I guess like a Chinese meat pie or Chinese stuffed pancake. I kind of think of it as like a pot sticker that's folded like a bao and then just flattened. So lots of stuff like that. This Friday coming up, we're doing a steamed shumai, which is probably like maybe one of the more common things that you see come up in Chinese dim sum when you order dumplings. So lots of things like that popping up over on the YouTube channel. So definitely make your way over to there if you're looking for fun stuff to cook. Cool. As always, if you have any questions for me, feel free to drop those in the chat. I don't know everything about pad see ew or Thai cooking, or I don't know everything about anything, but I know lots of stuff, so hopefully I can be helpful or informative, or at the very least fun to watch. Yeah. Glad to be back. Yeah, thank you. Glad to be cooking again. As with many of these stir fries, not just the Thai ones, but definitely all of the Chinese ones, but for sure many of the Thai stir fries too. We're starting off, that was 4 cloves of crushed and minced garlic that we just finished chopping up. And next, this is about a tablespoon or about 1 inch's worth of ginger. So, ginger and garlic, you'll very frequently will find them, especially in the We Can Cook recipes, coming up very often as the first thing that comes up in a lot of the recipes. It's not necessarily because we want everything to taste like garlic and ginger, but more because like as we start like developing or like building up these qualities of umami that we're looking for, it happens in layers, and very often the first layer that we lay down when we're building out these layers of umami start with garlic and ginger. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily happens in every Asian cuisine, but as I've approached it, tends to work out really well for me. So that was 4 cloves of crushed and minced garlic, and next what we're doing, this is about 1 inch or about a tablespoon of ginger, which we're doing a small dice on first, and then what we're going to do is our mince by our knife through it pretty quickly. This might be too much ginger. We'll find out. Both garlic and ginger are pretty pantry stable. So what I usually do is I'll buy it in pretty large quantities. I'll buy it in about like a pound of ginger and about 6 to 8 cloves of garlic, and then just sort of kind of hang on to them in that bowl behind me. Those are generally like, I'll probably go through it in about maybe 2 weeks or so, depending on how often I'm cooking. But because they're so stable, you can kind of hang on to them for a while. I've kept ginger for like months sometimes, and it will stay for a pretty long time because they're so stable. So this is a little bit too much ginger. So yeah. One of the Thai dishes that you don't have to have the super exotic, that you don't have to have the super exotic stuff for, that's actually a great point. So there are a couple of ingredients that are maybe a little bit hard to find if you don't live near like an Asian grocery store or somewhere where Asian food is cooked. But for the most part, you don't have to like find a lot of the stuff that's going to be hard to find. So to me, what those are, because I live in Chinatown, a lot of the ingredients that I have trouble finding end up being things that you don't use in Chinese food, because in Chinatown you can pretty much only find stuff that's used in Chinese food. So to me, what that ends up being is probably things like galangal root, and kaffir lime leaf, which are both very, very common in Thai food, but just really, really hard to find in Chinatown unless you drive. I would have to drive like 3-4 miles out of the way, and not even to a Thai grocery store. I would have to find it at a Vietnamese grocery store first. So yeah, to me that's what I look out for. Are not necessarily like super exotic stuff, but just like stuff that I don't think that I can find. But one of the things that is actually really, really iconic to Thai food is what we're doing right now, which is actually these Thai chilies. So if you've ever had Thai food and told the waiter that you want to dial up or down how hot or spicy the dish is, this is what they're adjusting. It's usually these Thai chilies. So what I'm going to do is this is going to be 5 Thai chilies that we're going to throw into our stir fry today, which is going to be like on the milder side of medium heat. So not necessarily spicy, but also not spicy. So what I always recommend for other folks who are attempting these recipes at this point is that if you are particularly averse to heat, or if you want to pay attention to how hot your dish gets, this is the thing that you should dial up or down. So if you want it to be really, really spicy, you could use a lot more. You could use like 6 to 10 Thai chilies. If you don't like spice, you could dial it all the way down. You could use 2 or 3. You could leave them out entirely. That's entirely to your discretion. But that's the thing that I would adjust. Yeah. You keep the lime leaf, lime leaf, galangal, and lemongrass. I didn't actually think of freezing that. That might be really smart. I just kept it. I kept it on hand for a while. I think I kept it on hand for maybe like 2-3 weeks, maybe even a little bit longer than that. And then I did like 3 or 4 recipes using those 2 ingredients. And then when they went bad, I just threw them out. And did it. Cool. H Mart. Oh yeah. If you live near H Mart, so that's the tricky thing. So H Mart, lots of people think of H Mart as just like a broadly Asian grocery store, but it definitely. So every Asian grocery store leans one some way. Ranch 99 is a really common one, or 99 Ranch, depending on where in the states you are. Is generally like a pretty broadly Asian grocery store, but it actually leans very, very hard into Chinese groceries. Whereas H Mart is technically a broad, like general Asian food grocery store, but it leans pretty hard into Korean food. So you could probably find a lot of the basic stuff like galangal root and lemongrass and lime leaves. But if you like trying to get really into Thai cooking, you're gonna end up running into walls at some point. So yeah, tricky. I have the same problem when I shop in grocery stores here in Chinatown too. This is like sometimes like the Chinatown grocery store that's nearby me, I can find things like lemongrass sometimes, but they don't carry it in huge quantities. So yeah, pretty interesting. So I digress. Today we're going to be using, so if you're following along, a pad see ew, which is what we're cooking today. Most traditionally would include I guess that's like a Chinese broccoli. I think that's what people call it, Chinese broccoli, referred to as gailan. That's a type of Chinese broccoli. It's a little bit longer and leafier. Actually, don't think it looks very similar to regular broccoli at all. I personally really don't like gailan, just because it's a vegetable that I grew up eating all the time, and I just don't like it. I find it to be really bitter and gross. So anytime that I make pad see ew, I usually sub it out for some plain old regular broccoli, which is this type of broccoli that you can generally find in most grocery stores. What we're using today, this is actually some pre-chopped florets of broccoli because it's left over from the food booth while we were cooking last month. So if you don't like buying the pre-chopped stuff, I actually don't recommend if you are not cooking in huge quantities like we are at the food booth. I don't think I would recommend using this stuff because I don't particularly like the way that it's chopped all the time. You'll notice that these florets are in kind of a little bit too small to my liking. I like them to be a little bit longer. You'll notice, so these florets, they're really, really short, so the stem has been chopped off all the way here. I usually like my florets to be a little bit longer. And the reason for that is because when we're trying to swap them out for gailan, What I'm trying to do is get the broccoli in the most similar shape to Gailon as possible, which is going to be long and leafy. So here's a little bit of a longer one. We could take a look. Usually what I'd like to go for is something more like this, where the stem is nice and long, and it's going to be like that stem, when it's really, really thin, is going to be able to fry in the wok really nicely, something like that. You find the most stuff there? Yeah, totally. I don't think the nearest H Mart to me is really far away. I think it's like, yeah, it might be like 10, 20 miles away. So I haven't been to an H Mart in a long time. Oh, Charlie, get a tree. Yeah, that's actually, so a spice tree, that's been on my to-do list. I would love to get a spice tree. Those look really cool, and somebody showed me one at one point, but haven't gotten around to it. Usually what I do in order to keep those spices fresh is I'll just put it in some water, kind of the same way that you would like preserve a flower. Somebody gave you like a dozen roses, you put it in a vase with water. I do that with like green onions or cilantro, chives, stuff like that. It seems to work out pretty well. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, see, this is the stuff that I really don't like about pre-chopped broccoli. You'll notice like the stem is completely removed, which I really hate. I guess the people are just like going for the florets with this stuff, but I really don't like it. So. Nah, stupid camera. So as much as I can when I'm not using the surplus food that came out of the food booth, I like to go for the unchopped broccoli. Just get yourself a whole head of broccoli, and then you can be a little bit more particular about the way that it's chopped. If you buy the pre-chopped stuff like this, you're kind of screwed already. So you don't really get very much stem with the broccoli. But this is I think like 5 or 6 pounds of broccoli, so we got to eat it up. So here we are. Cool. So what we are doing here, this might need a little bit more broccoli. What we are doing here, so I'm chopping my broccoli in half, and we're going for pretty thin and small spears, so relatively thin spears of broccoli. And the purpose of that is because most traditionally when you come across broccoli like this, here's a really big stock show. Most traditionally when you come across broccoli that looks like this, usually you see it in America, it will have some kind of par cook done. So very often when I see broccoli like this, I'll see people doing things like blanches. You might boil it, you might steam it, stuff like that. Anything that's basically going to help break down the really, really dense and like thick nature of that piece of broccoli because it's so like sturdy. What we're going to do today is we're actually not going to par cook it at all. We're actually just going to throw this straight into the wok, which means that we have to be careful about how we chop the broccoli. If you chop it too wide or if it's too large, if the stock is too thick, then it's not going to cook properly and then you're going to have undercooked broccoli. So in order to sort of assist in the way that we flash cook this broccoli, we want to try and make sure that we chop it as thinly as possible. So that's our broccoli. I'm giving it a really quick wash with just a little bit of fruit wash. But most importantly, before we head over to the stove, before we set it aside at least, we want to shake out as much of this water as possible because we're going to be frying it. So the more water that you throw into a wok fry, if you've ever thrown water into hot oil, a couple of things will happen. The first and most dangerous thing that will happen is that the oil is going to rapidly start evaporating that water, and what happens when that happens is it's going to start spraying hot oil everywhere, which is real dangerous in how you burn oil on your face, which I've done a few times. So before we throw this into the wok fry, we want to do our best to shake out as much of this water as possible. The second and also important reason for that is because the more water that ends up in that wok fry when you toss this broccoli in, the wok is going to be spending its time and energy burning off that liquid, which is not what we want it to be doing. We want our wok to be spending its time and heat cooking the broccoli. We don't want it to be burning off water. So do our very best before we get it into the wok, shake out as much of that water as possible. Cool. All right, we got a couple more things to throw together. First up, just real quick, we're gonna take, 2 of these eggs, which hopefully that won't happen. I'm gonna whisk 2 of these up. We're gonna throw these into our wok fry on top of our chow fun, and it's gonna be how we get the eggs to sort of coat the noodles, which is kind of the quality of egg that you'll probably associate with every kind of Thai noodle that you've ever had. So pad Thai, pad see, pad timao, all of those things. That's how it's done. They put in the egg afterward. All right, next up, this is going to be some firm tofu. So the original recipe, if you were following along over on YouTube, I believe the original recipe used chicken thigh. I think we used chicken thigh or chicken breast. I can't remember. Some form of chicken. You'll find definitely if you come across this in the States that it can be substituted with a number of different kinds of protein. I've done this with all sorts of kinds of protein. I've done it with pork at one point. I've done it with chicken a lot. That's probably the most common thing that I've done this with. I have done it with tofu many times. This is the best way to make a vegetarian pad see. So we're going to take a shot at that today, mostly because I ran out of chicken. So here we are. What's most important about the way that we approach our tofu, though, is a couple. The first thing is that we're not going to start treating it like chicken. So if you're following it from our original recipe, you can probably see it on our notebook too. That chicken that calls for a marinade, we're just going to skip that marinade entirely. My biggest gripe with the way that most people approach tofu is that they try and make it taste like meat, which I hate. Tofu doesn't taste like meat. Stop trying to make it taste like meat. It's going to be bland. That's kind of the point. What we are going to try and do is we're going to try and get nice texture from it, though. So we're going to throw this into the wok with a sear, and that's going to give us this nice crispy piece of tofu, which is going to be a lot more rewarding than trying to make it taste like chicken, which is dumb. Cool. So that's our tofu. We're going to set that aside, probably in a bowl. It should go in a bowl. Just like we did with our broccoli, though, I'm also shaking out a lot of the water here. For the same reason, we don't want our wok fry when we go and try and sear that tofu to be spending all of its time and energy burning off the water. We don't want that. What we want our wok fry to be doing is searing the tofu. So instead, we're shaking out as much of that water as possible, and that's going to let our wok fry focus on searing tofu instead of burning water. Cool. So next up, this is our fresh chow fun. So if you live near pretty much any of the Asian grocery stores, you will probably come across fresh chow fun. Especially if you live near a Chinese grocery store, you will see these come up a lot. What's really tricky about fresh chow fun is that when we say fresh chow fun, I mean it's really fresh. Like it's literally delivered probably that day. Sometimes you might see it a day old, and when it's a day old, it's pretty stale already. So fresh chow fun, it's pretty tricky to get your hands on for that reason, because it's so pantry unstable. I guess the opposite of pantry stable. So what I love doing, though, because it's so delicate, I love using it instead of the dried stuff. But if you can't find it, or if you're not able to get your hands on fresh chow fun at all, I've also found that a dried but what we are going to do before we head over to the stove, because chow fun is so delicate, before we do anything else, what I like to do is break apart the noodles. It's very useful, because if you're not careful about how these noodles are established, what will happen is if you try and throw this whole thing into the wok like we are right now, you can see it's a big old block. What will happen is that the noodles, they may or may not come apart in the wok fry, which is going to be a complete disaster. And if you've ever thrown a block of chow fun into the wok expecting it to come apart and like break into noodles, and then it didn't, it's a real big problem, because then you're basically just going to be eating a block of chow fun for dinner, which is not exciting. So what I like to do before we head over to the stove is take a moment and break these noodles apart, and just sort of separate the noodles from their block, like so. Usually, most typically, especially with fresh chow fun like this, what will happen is these noodles, when they're stored or packaged, they would be packaged in oil, which is why you see on my hands they're covered in oil right now. It's because the noodles themselves are covered in oil. So that's going to help us break these noodles apart. But even with that oil, the noodles are still super delicate. So we're exercising a lot of caution and just being very gentle with the way that I pull these noodles apart. Because if you're too aggressive or too eager, you'll definitely start snapping noodles. So we want to try and preserve these nice big long strains of noodles like this. Otherwise, you're going to end up with like lots of crumbly bits of chow fan, which is also not what we're after. What else can we say? So if you've tuned into any of these streams before or seen any of these live streams or recipe videos even that deal with fresh chow fan, you'll know that I have spent many streams and many videos fucking up chow fan because it is so hard to work with because of how perishable it is. So what I like to do, if you do come across fresh chow fan and it has gone stale, really useful, you can toss it into the microwave and let it go for about 1.5 minutes on regular power, and that will generally start loosening things up, so it will help you be able to pull these noodles apart. If your chow fan is older though, if it's like over 24 hours old, you're probably going to end up having a lot of trouble getting these noodles to pull apart, so the microwave, it tends to help a little bit. If all else fails though, if you can't get your hands on fresh chow fan, definitely go for the freeze-dried stuff. It won't be quite as good, it's not going to be quite as delicate and like soft and chewy, but it will still be edible, and you'll still be able to create the same dish. So it takes probably another extra 5 minutes to pull these noodles apart, but I think it's really important. Definitely do not skip this step. Definitely don't just throw this whole thing into the wok fry, because you'll end up with a big old block of chow fan. Is it difficult to make chow fan noodles from scratch? I actually have not tried. I know that some folks that have followed some of these recipes have done it and have mentioned that it wasn't actually that difficult to do. So I've actually never done it before, but I have seen at least 2 different people who have tried this recipe and also the pad ki mao, and I think the beef chow fan recipes. And folks have told me that they made the noodles themselves. So it didn't sound like it was super difficult. But yeah, that seems to be like the alternative to folks who are trying to reproduce some of these chow fan recipes, but can't find it in stores, is to make it yourself. But I guess just because I've have always had pretty easy access to fresh chow fan, I've never actually tried to make it myself. But really what it is just a sheet of rice noodle that they chop up really thinly. Cool, yeah. Good question though. Yeah, I know I've seen at least 2 people doing fresh chow fan from scratch. So you'll see we're pulling all of these noodles apart. You'll notice that some of these are a little bit more difficult than others. But at the same time, we're still being very careful not to break any of these noodles. We want to try our very best to preserve these nice big long string of noodles like this, because that's going to help us get this nice luxurious delicate chow fan. So when we're done, it should look something like this, and also your hands should be covered in oil, something like this. If they're not covered in oil, then the chow fan that you're working with was probably not very good chow fan. So. All right, so that's our chow fan. We're going to set that aside, and let's dive into our sauce next. Yeah, thanks, Charlie. Thanks for asking. Good question. Okay, so for our sauce base, we're going to do a couple of things that are probably you've seen me do in a lot of different recipes. This is going to be it might be the same thing that we used in our pad siu and our pad ki mao recipe. It's also going to look very similar to the thing that we used in our beef chow fan and our lion's head meatball recipes. All 3 of these use very similar ingredients because of the way that we approach dark soy sauce. So we're going to start off as with many sauces. This is 4 tablespoons of soy sauce, just regular old soy sauce. Then next we're going to add, this is going to be 4 tablespoons or a 1/4 cup of fish sauce. Fish sauce, as the name implies, comes from the fermentation of fish, so it is where we're going to get all of that fishy umami. Then next what we're going to do is add our sambal olek, which is going to be where all of the really rudimentary or fundamental heat comes from. So it's going to build nicely on top of our Thai chilies, which is where all of our really aggressive heat is going to come from. I find sambal olek to be pretty mellow, or relatively more mellow than our other forms of hot sauce. Just like the other forms of hot sauce that we use in other recipes, they have equivalents in other cuisines too. So the equivalent in Chinese food would be what we refer to as dobanjang. In Korean food, that's gochujang. In Japanese food, that's miso paste. You'll find that a lot of these sauces have similar qualities in other cuisines because they're all inspired by each other. So that's our heat. And then finally, the last three and most important things that go into a pad see ew sauce might be the three things that are, I think, in all three, or like pretty much every dark soy sauce recipe. You will probably see me using all three of these in conjunction very, very often. This is 2 tablespoons of dark soy sauce, 2 tablespoons of black vinegar, and 2 tablespoons of oyster sauce, where we use all three of these. Because what we're looking for is that deep, dark caramel coloring that comes from these 3 ingredients. I love using all 3 of them in conjunction because they pair really, really nicely. And it's going to be where all of the color and like deeply dark and caramel qualities of our pad see ew comes from. And maybe might be the most important ingredient in the whole dish. So that's our dark soy sauce. This is our black vinegar. And finally, here's our oyster sauce. If there's one that we can omit, it's probably going to be the oyster sauce, because you want to remember that we also have, that was a 1/4 cup of fish sauce that we also just threw in, which is going to have similar qualities of umami. But if you've got both, I love using both in this recipe. So the last thing that we want to note about our sauce base, so this is very, very concentrated. Everything that we just threw in here is super, super concentrated, which means, and I know that at least one person has done this, that we don't want to just throw this straight into the wok when we go and toss our wok fry. They're very, very important. This stuff, because it is so concentrated, we want to add it a little bit at a time and make sure that we don't over season with this stuff. Otherwise, we can absolutely end up with a overly salty, potentially inedible stir fry. All right. Is that it for chopping? I think that's it for chopping. Let's head to the stove. Cool, so over on the stove, I've got my wok heating up. We're gonna let that get ripping hot, and then we're gonna start off by searing our tofu. Yeah. Hello to everyone just tuning in. My name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. If this is your first time catching one of these streams, we're here every Tuesday and Thursday at 6:30 PST with new recipes out over on my YouTube channel every Friday. So last Friday, we came out with a recipe for a Chinese xianbing, which is like a stuffed meat pancake, I guess. I think of it like a pot sticker that's been flattened, and then you kind of eat it. You pan fry it the same way that you do a pot sticker. So that came out last Friday. This Friday coming up is going to be a Chinese shumai, which is like one of the steamed dumpling, probably the most common steamed dumpling that you'll come across in Chinese dim sum. Friday after that, we're doing fried rice burritos, which comes from the food pop-up that we do every Saturday. What else? After that, coming up is pad gras prao, which is a Thai street food dish. That's coming up next 3 Fridays from now. So lots of stuff like that coming up over on the YouTube channel. So if you're interested in stuff like that, definitely make your way over to the YouTube channel to check out what's going on over there. We have cool new recipes coming out every Friday. And generally, if you catch me live streaming at one of these things, we're probably cooking through a recipe that has already come out on the channel. So the pad see ew dish that we're cooking right now is a recipe that came out on the channel, I want to say back in like late 2020, in like November or December. So if you're interested in stuff like that, definitely make your way over to the YouTube, check out what's going on over there. We're working our way up to 5,000 subs by the end of the month, and we're pretty close, I think. So cool. If you're watching on Reddit, that's the YouTube channel at the bottom of the screen, youtube.com/woocancook. If you're watching on YouTube, it's the channel you're already on. You did it. Good job. All right, so over on the stove, our wok, it's getting nice and hot. We should start seeing all of this smoke coming off of the wok. If you don't see smoke coming off of the wok, that probably means that it's not hot enough yet. So you want to be sure that it's very, very hot before you do anything. What I like to do if I'm still not sure is just flick a little bit of water on it. And what you should be able to see when that water hits the wok should evaporate pretty quickly, so we can see all of that water. As soon as it hits the wok, it starts evaporating. That's generally a good sign. That probably means that your wok is nice and hot. I'm starting off, this is 4 tablespoons of peanut oil going in. And we're going to start off by searing our tofu, which is over here. Let's use some tongs today. So what I like to do with sears like this is add it 1 or 2 pieces at a time. With our goal being that we want to try and make sure that we don't end up stacking things on top of itself. Because that will end up just steaming, which is not what we're after. So we're trying to get our tofu to pick up some nice solid texture and get nice and crispy. So what we don't want to do, and this happens if you just drop the tofu in very often, is that pieces will end up landing like that. This is not what we want, because this piece right here, it's not actually going to sear. It's just going to end up steaming because it's sitting on top of other things. So what we want to do is make sure that our tofu, every piece of it, is sitting on the surface of the wok. If it's not hitting the surface of the wok, then it's not going to sear. It's just going to steam. Which is why, I mentioned, very, very important, don't just drop the tofu in. Pay attention to how it's going into the wok, and I like to say is add it a piece at a time. It'll take you an extra minute or 2, but it's worth it. Like so. I've gone back and forth on whether or not you can sear an entire block of tofu in a wok. I ended up doing it mostly because I don't feel like doing this in 2 batches today. But if you're very concerned, what we're trying to make sure is that our wok stays nice and hot. So if it overfills, then it's going to start shedding heat, which is not ideal. All right. That's going to do it. So we're going to let that sear. I like to, when we're dealing with tofu, let that go for a full 3 minutes. Tofu takes a little bit longer than things like chicken or beef. So we're looking for a full 3-minute sear on this. And the key to any sear, really, whatever it is that you're searing, this is also true with steak, it's true with chicken, it's true with tofu, it's true with noodles, is if you want it to pick up any color, what's most important is that you got to stop moving it. The more that you fuss around with whatever it is that you're searing, the more trouble that you're going to have getting it to sear. If you start agitating it, flipping it over, trying to look at, see, maybe check on it, that's when you start messing up the sear, and then you just end up with browning, which is not quite the same thing. So for our crispy tofu, what we want to do is avoid agitating it as much as possible. So the one exception that I like to do when I'm especially working in a wok with a rounded bottom like this one, is I like to give it a little bit of a rotation every maybe 30 seconds or so. And what that's going to do is it's going to help us get this hot oil to sort of like cover the entire surface of where the tofu exists right now. So if we're not careful, what will happen is the oil, it has a tendency to pull up right around the center where the wok rounds out. And if you don't rotate that wok enough, what will happen is the only parts of the tofu that will sear is where the oil is. So where the oil is not, so like out here on this outer ring, what will end up happening is that tofu is just going to burn because it doesn't have oil on it. So what I like to do is give the wok a little bit of a rotation every maybe 30 seconds or so, and that's just going to help make sure that our tofu has a nice even sear. This is also at this point where I also like to mention is that if you don't mind cleaning 2 pans, probably a flat bottom skillet would work a little bit better than a rounded bottom wok. But cool. Yeah. Cool. So we're gonna let that sear probably for this is we're rounding at up to 3 minutes. I'm gonna let that go probably for another 2 minutes at least. What I'm looking at is the quality of color that you can see at the edge of the tofu. Usually with chicken, that takes about 2 minutes before we flip. Same thing with things like beef or steak, pork, ground chicken, noodles, stuff like that. With things like tofu, and this is also true with things like potatoes too, is that it takes a little bit longer because they're a little bit more dense. So with tofu, I usually go for 3 to 4 minutes. It kind of depends on how thoroughly you dried that tofu. The drier the tofu, the faster that it will sear. But if it has too much moisture in it, then what's happening is that your wok is expending its energy, burning off the liquid first, which is often the case when I don't shake the tofu enough. So what we're going to do here is we're going to do a quick batch cook with our tofu here. So we're going to sear it, and then we're going to give it a quick toss, and then we'll probably pull it out of the wok and then do our remaining ingredients. That's going to be our broccoli and our aromatics, so that garlic, ginger, and the Thai chilies, which we're going to toss with that broccoli. So essentially what we're going to be doing is a process that you refer to in Chinese cooking, or most wok cooking in general, as batch cooking, which is a thing that you would generally only be doing when we're working in a home range. So this is the real trick. That is probably how the one and most important thing to how to work around a wok cook in a home range is that. So the main problem that we have to address is that our home ranges, they don't get quite as hot as our wok burners. So the wok burners that we use in the kitchen, in our food booths, they go up to, I think, 70, 80,000 BTUs. Our home range only burns at, I think, like 25,000 BTUs. Which is only like literally a fraction of how hot a wok burner gets. Same is going to be true if you've ever cooked in like a restaurant or a commercial kitchen. So what we're trying to do in order to work around the fact that we don't have that really, really high heat is that we're going to pull things out of the wok pretty constantly. And what that's essentially doing is that by removing stuff from the wok at a regular basis, is that it keeps the wok from overfilling. So if the wok has too much stuff in it, what will ultimately end up happening is that your wok is not going to be able to stay hot anymore because it's spending all of its energy keeping everything that's in the wok hot. So while it's actually empty, it doesn't actually take that much heat to get a wok ripping hot. That's why when it's really empty, it only takes about 30-45 seconds to heat up. Once it starts filling up, though, the wok starts losing all of this heat because it's using all of this heat to cook everything that's in the wok at once. So what we do when we cook on a home range is that we cook certain elements and then we're going to pull it out and then cook our next element, then pull that out and then cook one more element and then put everything back into the wok at the very, very end. So the only point in time where the wok is full is at the very end when nothing is really cooking anymore. We're really just tossing the combined and basically using the wok as a mixing bowl. All right, so we're actually rounding 5 minutes, so this took a little bit longer than I thought. But you can see right here at the edge of our tofu that there's some nice, good-looking browning. You can kind of see that. I think you can see it on YouTube. I don't think you can see it on Reddit. But we've got this nice-looking browning right here. That's what we're looking for. So we're going to give this a little bit of a shake. There it goes. And give it a toss. Cool, so that's what we're looking for. I'm going to add just a little pinch of salt. I don't like to go too heavy with the tofu seasoning here because it's not really, it's kind of a futile effort. But we're giving that a quick toss, then pulling it out. Then finally, we're going to reheat that wok. I'm going to let it reheat for about 30 seconds or so, and then we're going to dive into our veggies next. Cool. So if we were working with something like chicken or beef or anything that was shedding fat, at this point I would mention that it's very important to wipe down the wok before you continue with your batch cook. With tofu, there's nothing really that's going to leave behind, so there's no fats that's left behind. So I don't really think it's that important to wipe down your wok because you're not really wiping anything out. It's just tofu. So I'm going to add, that was another 4 tablespoons of peanut oil, and then we're going to do one more long yao. And then in goes our aromatics. So here's our ginger, followed by our garlic, and finally our Thai chilies. Then we're going to give this a stir fry, so a quick bloom, maybe about 10 seconds. What I like to say is use your nose at this point. If you're not sure, we're trying to pay attention to when you start smelling garlic and ginger. It should be pretty aromatic. If you don't smell it, then it's probably not bloomed out yet. Usually for me that's about 10 seconds though. Then next, that's our broccoli going in. Oops. I'm just giving that a real quick toss to combine, mostly just making sure that that garlic comes off of the bottom of the wok. If we throw that broccoli in and just leave it there, what's happening is all of your aromatics, they're still at the bottom of the wok. And if it's still at the bottom, it's going to start burning. So what we're doing here is just sort of tossing things to combine, just to make sure that those aromatics don't start burning here. Lastly, the last thing I'll mention, that, and I talk about this pretty much any time that we're working with Thai chilies, is that stuff, it's very caustic. So what's happening when you toss Thai chilies into a wok is that the seeds of those Thai chilies are hitting that hot oil too. And when those seeds hit hot oil, they're going to start releasing their capsaicin that's going out into the air, the same air that you're breathing. So when that happens, you want to make sure that your windows are nice and wide open. You probably also want to unhook those smoke detectors, otherwise you're probably going to start coughing, which is me all the time. Cool, so that's our broccoli. We're going to let that go maybe for another, maybe another minute. And then the last thing that we're going to do is we're going to add everything back to the wok and then toss to combine, and that's pretty much going to be it. I mentioned this earlier too, but since we're not incorporating a par cook to that broccoli, what's going to happen is that we don't have, what that par cook normally would be doing is breaking down that really, really dense quality that's you'll probably associate with pretty much all of the broccoli you've ever had. That's what's so great about the stalks, is that they're really, really dense, so you get this nice crispy bite to it. So without that par cook, since we didn't steam it or boil it or blanch it, do any of those things that you normally would be doing with broccoli, we're not going to have those nice soft pieces of broccoli. What we're going to end up having is this very, very flash cooked piece of broccoli, since it's only going to be in the wok for about 3-4 minutes, 2-3 minutes probably. And after that, basically what we're doing is just cooking off that real raw bitterness of the broccoli. And that's pretty much it. So next up, I'm going to add my tofu back to the wok, followed by our chow fun. We mentioned this earlier too, but remember that this chow fun, it is very, very delicate. So we don't want to start doing any more of that aggressive wok tossing that we were doing earlier. So I'm not going to go in and start shoveling anymore. But we're very, very gently going underneath and turning, and that's it. So no hard, aggressive tossing anymore. Otherwise, you're going to start, you're going to break up a couple of things, but the main thing that you're going to break up is that chow fun, which we don't want. We want to try and preserve those nice long strands of noodle. So in order to make sure that we don't start breaking stuff apart, we're being very gentle with our turning now. And I'm just gradually grabbing, this is about a handful or so of chow fun at a time. We're adding it a little bit at a time, followed by a little bit of that sauce, and then giving a real gentle turn. Last of our chow fun. And then a little bit more of our sauce here. I'm holding back, that looks like about a 1/4 cup of our sauce here, because it looks like we might actually not need it. And then finally for our eggs, what I like to do is go around the sides here. And that's going to let those eggs get a little bit of a chance to set. We don't want them to start developing egg curds or anything. But it does give a little bit of an opportunity to develop some amount of setting before we start tossing the combine. What's my favorite cereal? The one that I have right now is Puffins. But I don't know that it's my favorite cereal though. So just like we were doing before, we're still tossing very, very gently, mostly just making sure that those eggs start setting. And then we're gonna be done. Yeah. So at this point, you'll notice that I just killed the overhead of the stove too. But at this point, now that everything is in the wok, you'll notice that all of the sizzling in our wok just disappeared. That means that the wok is not hot anymore, or not aggressively hot in the way that we need it to be when we're wok cooking. That's okay in our case because there's not really much left to cook anymore. We're basically just tossing things to combine. So what's happening is now that the wok is nice and full, the heat is spending all of its heat trying to heat up everything that's in the wok once. So in our case, that's fine because we're not cooking anymore. We're basically just combining. But if at any point you're still cooking stuff, so if you were trying to sear tofu, that's going to be a real big problem for you because basically what's happening is that you're cooking on medium to medium low heat, which is not ideal. All right, the last thing that I'll mention, it looks like we're reserving, this looks like a little bit less than a quarter cup of that sauce. I actually don't think that we're going to need it because I think we're using a little bit less, that looks like a little bit less than a pound of chow fun. So what I always say, and anytime that we do recipes like this, especially ones using dark soy sauce like today, is that adjust to taste. If you don't end up using all of that sauce, don't feel bad. So let's remove this from it. And the last thing that we want to do anytime that we finish cooking in a wok, especially ones made of carbon steel. It's hot, so don't go and sit down, which I know is very tempting because there's food in front of you. But what I like to do is while that wok is hot, we're going to give it a quick rinse. Generally, when I'm working with egg-based dishes like this, you might require a little bit of a scrub, so I'm going to use some steel wool and just sort of pull off any of that residual egg. Nothing real aggressive, it's basically a real quick scrub. And then you'll notice pretty much everything just comes right off. So last, we're going to give it a quick wipe down. I like to do this back on heat because it kind of just keeps the wok nice and hot and keeps stuff from solidifying on the wok. And that's going to be it. Oops, the camera's off. Oh, any tips for those stuck on electric range? Yeah, good question. So definitely my favorite solution to that is get a portable gas range because those are relatively cheap. You can buy them and they burn propane. If you can't get one, if you don't have the ability to use one of those in an apartment, that kind of makes sense because they're going to kick up a lot of smoke, and if it's not over an overhead, your apartment's going to get filled with smoke pretty quick. My next best solution, and I actually think that it works pretty well because I have used cast iron on electric ranges and it kind of just makes sense in my head, is a cast iron wok. So a wok made out of cast iron. So the biggest problem, anytime people ask this a lot, but anytime that we're working with woks, what's happening is, so you'll notice, so we can pop back over here and take a look. Our wok, unlike a frying pan, it doesn't have a heavy bottom to it. So right here in most frying pans, you would see a big heavy bottom, like a big block of steel here. What's happening is that heavy block of steel, it's keeping the wok hot. So it's keeping the pan hot because the fire, what's happening is your range is heating up that heavy bottom. And that's keeping the pan hot. So if you turn off the fire, that heavy bottom stays hot for a little bit. It's going to keep that wok hot. With a wok, since it doesn't have that heavy bottom, what's happening is that it requires constant heat, so the fire has to be on the entire time. As soon as you turn that fire off, the wok is going to drop temperature really, really quickly. This is generally not a problem if you're working with most frying pans, because most frying pans have that heavy bottom to keep things hot while the stove range turns off. So when we're working with electric coil ranges, what's going on is that it has this attenuator, so it heats things up to a certain point, and then once it reaches a certain temperature, it turns off. For not very long, usually about like maybe 10 seconds. You can even see the range turning off when it hits that temperature. But that when you're working in frying pans, that's not that big of a deal, because if it shuts off for about 10 seconds, that heavy bottom of your frying pan, it's going to keep the skillet nice and hot for you. But when you're working in a wok, which does not have that heavy bottom, what's going to happen is that you're going to lose all of your heat really, really quickly. And that's going to be a real big problem. So that's how you end up cooking on medium to medium low heat. So what I think my best solution to that is get yourself a nice cast iron wok, which is going to have all of that heat retention property that comes from any time that you've ever used a cast iron skillet. So what's happening is, because it's made out of cast iron, it takes a lot longer to heat up because it's made out of cast iron. So you're literally heating it up an entire block of cast iron. But once it heats up to that temperature, those things, they can stay hot for a long time, like probably 5-10 minutes. It will stay hot even after the fire is off. I used to have a cast iron wok, and it would stay hot for like literally 10 minutes after the fire was off. So what that would do is solve the electric coil range shutting off intermittently, and make sure that you stay on nice hot heat. So basically what you do is turn on that electric we can get, and then just sort of use the heat retention properties of that cast iron to keep that wok nice and hot for you. I don't think I have ever tried to do this on an electric range, but it makes sense in my head, and I think that's how most folks work around wok cooking on electric ranges. Same goes for induction tops, any kind of basically any kind of range that doesn't have gas. Cool. Yeah. Cool, I think that's it, everyone. Let me know if you have any questions. I'll be here doing some dishes, sticking around. As always, we're here every Tuesday and Thursday at 6:30 PST with new recipes out on my YouTube channel every Friday. So last Friday we came out with a recipe for a xianbing, which is a Chinese like stuffed meat pancake. This Friday coming up, we're coming out with a shumai, which is a like Chinese dim sum dumpling. It's like what I think they refer to it as like quickly buy sell or something like that, quick sell. Basically what it is shumai. It's not wrapped. It doesn't have pleats, the same that a pot stick or a dumpling does. It's basically just a clump of meat that's shoved into a wonton wrapper and then turned. And that's why when you see shumai, it has this open face to it. It's because it's wrapped really, really quickly. So that's coming up this Friday. Friday after that, we're doing fried rice burritos, which is part of our fusion series. Lots of fun stuff like that coming up over on the YouTube channel every Friday. So if you haven't yet, definitely hop over, check out what's going on over there. And help us hit our subscriber goal. We're working our way up to 5,000 subs by the end of the month. So if you want to help us hit our subscriber goal, please hop over and subscribe. Lastly, if you're looking for this recipe, it already lives over on my YouTube channel, which came out, I think that was a couple of months ago. So if you're looking for that stuff, it all already lives over on YouTube. Yeah, would a flat bottom wok or a big frying pan? Yeah, so definitely the thing that most folks go with is a flat bottom wok. I always recommend, if you're not familiar with wok cooking, that a flat bottom wok is gonna feel most similar to like every other frying pan that you've had because it has a flat bottom. There are some benefits that come with working in a round bottomed wok. We ran through it today. Also, I love frying eggs in it. Basically what happens in a rounded bottom is that all of the oil, it condenses at the bottom where the wok browns out. So that's really, really useful with things like frying eggs, because you can put an egg where that oil meets. And then it's essentially deep frying the egg because the egg is submerged in frying oil. So stuff like that you can't really do in a flat bottom wok. But if you're not familiar with wok cooking, those flat bottom woks are going to feel really, really similar. Some of them even have heavy bottoms to it. So all really useful. And as for like a big frying pan, you can absolutely just use a big frying pan. I used to wok cook in a cast iron skillet for like years before I got a decent wok, because for years I had this really crappy non-stick Teflon wok that I hated, so I would do it in a. Anything that's going to retain that heat is going to work really well. Yeah, so that you've heard that flat bottom woks are bad because they concentrate the heat too much. I have not had that problem. I've actually had pretty good luck using flat bottom woks, but I also have not used the flat bottoms super often. I don't find that to be a problem too much, but I also have not used the flat bottoms on an electric range, so I don't know. My preference is by far using a rounded bottom wok, because it gets you this nice dispersal of heat. But either way, no matter what it is you're using, if you're not cooking in a wok burner, you're not going to get very good heat distribution because the wok is never going to heat all the way around. So the way that a wok burner works is that you have this jet engine, the jet engine that people refer to when you talk about wok burners. It literally looks like a jet engine. And the flame, it literally goes around the wok. So if we're looking at our wok, and it's rounded out like this, so you have this edge that goes all the way up. And when the flame is really, really hot, it spreads all the way around. So this whole surface of the wok starts heating up. So this area right here gets nice and hot, not just right here. If you're working on a home range, you're never going to be able to achieve that because the wok is never going to heat up in that area. So I don't think it's going to make that much of a difference. Either way, if you're cooking on an electric range, the flat bottom is going to be the best solution for you. But definitely, my favorite solution is going to be that cast iron wok. It's also going to be really, really heavy. So that's the other disclaimer that I'll mention, is that when I had a cast iron wok, I think it was like 12, 16 inches. It was pretty small, and it weighed a lot. Like I think it weighed like almost 30 pounds. So it was ultimately the reason why I got rid of it, is because I just got tired of moving it from apartment to apartment. It's like literally like carrying around a dumbbell because it's made out of cast iron. So it weighs a lot, but it is definitely a good solution to cooking on an electric range. Yeah, thanks for asking. Cool. All right, I think that's it, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll be back this coming Thursday cooking. What are we cooking on Thursday? Oh, I didn't announce it. I forget what we're cooking on Thursday, but we'll be back this Thursday cooking something. And lastly, the recipe coming out this Friday. We're doing some shumai coming out Friday, so hop over to YouTube, check out what's going on over there, and I'll see you Thursday. All right, thanks, everyone. Bye.
If you think that you don't know, never mind, that you still don't love yourself, no. You can find it from somebody else, no. Everybody's got to grow up sometime. Funny how we shoot the move, still will we fight it, baby. Alright, never mind. Everybody wants to be nothing. I still got dreams, but they don't love me like they used to love it. And I'm reminded of how bad I used to want it. And yes, I still got dreams, but more like a toolkit of my 20s, and it's breaking me down. Oh, no. Ooh. sweet as Tennessee whiskey. You're real sweet as strawberry wine. You're as warm as lesser baby. Darling, I'll stay stoned on your lip all the time. I live for love on the same old places. Found the bottom of the bottle was always down. But you poured out your heart, and I didn't want to waste it. There's nothing like love to give me you're as smooth as Tennessee whiskey. You're as sweet as strawberry wine. Ooh, you're as warm as a glass of beer. Darling, I'll stay stoned on your love all the time. You're as smooth as Tennessee whiskey. You're as sweet as strawberry wine. You're as warm as a glass of brandy. Darling, I'll stay stoned on your love all the time.